There are passages in Book of Life that should not exist, revelations so dark that even Teresa trembled as she wrote them. This is one of them. The vision she recorded, the deepest, the most terrifying, was not a warning for the weak, but an urgent call to all who still postpone their inner conversion. Because the moment Teresa descended into the shadows of her own inner castle, she discovered something few dare to confront. The soul only finds peace of God when it confronts its most hidden truth. And that is precisely why this episode still evokes fear. Today it forces us to decide whether we will continue to run from our pain or whether we will finally let God illuminate what we have avoided for so many years. If you've ever felt fear, anxiety, sleepless nights, restless anxieties, this revelation speaks directly to you. Today, you will understand why Teresa never prayed the same way again and why your own inner life may be on the verge of the same awakening. Comment below. Do you believe that God still speaks through the shadows? When the light disappears, Teresa's descent into spiritual darkness and what it teaches about inner healing. There are times when the inner light seems to go out and the soul, as Teresa described in Book of Life, she feels drawn into a deep night where nothing consoles her. It is in this heavy silence, marked by anxieties, thoughts, that the heart learns to breathe again under the refuge in God. Like someone hiding in hiding place of the Most High, the soul experiences the weight of darkness, but also the beginning of a tenderness it cannot yet name. Just as Teresa faced periods when mental prayer seemed arid and distant, everyone goes through days when their own faith seems to vanish. But it is in this emptiness that inner peace it germinates, slowly and faithfully, like underground water that nourishes the hidden garden of the soul. The absence of light is not abandonment, it is preparation. It is how God softens the excessive inner noise and opens space for a purer trust. And while this darkness seems to linger, the soul realizes it is being carried away under his wings. As they proclaim the Psalm 91 and the Psalm 23, even without realizing it, she is guided. This subtle perception becomes a cure for sleepless nights, anxieties, worries, and weaknesses that seemed invincible. And in glimpsing this truth, Teresa naturally leads us to the next step, that moment when the soul begins to feel itself abandoned by God, when in fact it is being shaped for a deeper delivery. The moment Teresa felt abandoned by God, a psychological and mystical breakdown. There is a moment in the soul's journey when, as Teresa confessed, the painful impression arises that God has withdrawn. Prayer loses its flavor. The heart fears being deceived, and the shadow of anxiety it even involves that which once offered comfort. This feeling of abandonment is not punishment, but part of the slow emptying of early spiritual illusions. When the soul still seeks security in emotions and not in the silent love that remains. Teresa went through this inner collapse at the beginning of the mansions, when faith seemed fragile and the fear he became a companion. She describes how the heart becomes confused, fears getting lost, fears deceiving itself, a struggle that echoes in our own nights of doubt, especially in evening prayer, when worries, memories, and racing thoughts resurface. But it is at this point that the true character is born, trusting God, stripped of the desire to control the path. And as the soul faces this feeling of absence, it begins to realize that something deeper is being purified, the attachment to the comfortable images of faith. The soul is led to its own loving surrender, like someone who withdraws into themselves, in the shelter of the Most High even without feeling the warmth of his presence. It is on this threshold that Teresa prepares us for the next step, understanding how inner terror can transform into purification when the soul descends into the deepest chambers of itself, a path she experienced intensely in her vision of hell. Terror in the soul's chamber. Teresa's vision of hell and the neuroscience of trauma when Teresa describes. In Book of Life, the vision of hell that shook her to her bones reveals not only a mystical event, but an abrupt descent into the darkest regions of the soul. Those lower chambers where the rawest fear burns, formless pain and a feeling of utter powerlessness reflect the shadows that everyone carries. There, no one. Evening prayer seems sufficient. Only the silent clamor for divine protection it sustains, the heart. This encounter with inner terror awakens something that was previously dormant, the awareness that without God nothing remains safe. Teresa emerged from this vision with greater humility, more vigilant and more devoted to God. Refuge in God likewise. When we confront our own wounds, traumas, and memories that burn like invisible fire, the soul learns to seek, hiding place of the most high, like returning to the only possible home. The fear that seemed to destroy transforms into purifying light, and in this profound purification, the heart realizes that the experience was not meant to condemn, but to liberate. Terror becomes a gateway to a new way of living, simpler, truer, more dependent on, strength in faith. Just like Teresa, the modern soul finds there an urgent call to inner conversion, and it is precisely at this point that the path shifts, when prayer, which previously seemed like refuge, begins to reveal its cracks, leading us to the next step, where spiritual practice ceases to be comfort and begins to expose the truth of the heart. The shattering of Teresa's illusions. When prayer no longer feels safe, there comes a moment when prayer, once as gentle as water in an inner garden, becomes a mirror that reveals what the soul did not want to see. Teresa experienced this intensely, the feeling that the space of prayer no longer offered solace, but exposure. There, things emerged: fear, anxiety, doubts and anxieties that she thought she had overcome. This rupture is not a failure. It is the crumbling of illusions that prevent total surrender to God. Teresa feared being deceived, feared making mistakes, feared her own spiritual shadow. This constant fear, so present in the beginnings of the mansions, recalls what we all feel when faith doesn't respond as before. And it is precisely in this place of vulnerability that true faith is born. Prayer for strength, that which does not seek immediate comfort, but the courage to stand before God without masks. Thus, the soul learns to trust even when everything seems uncertain, and when this inner structure breaks down, a new path opens up, still unknown, but profoundly purifying. Prayer ceases to be an emotional refuge and becomes a field of truth, where the soul learns to rest under his wings, even without feeling their gentleness. Teresa moves forward, and with her we are called to follow, to that point where the heart fears losing its reason before the intensity of the divine, the next step on the inner path. The fear of going mad, Teresa's mystical confusion, and the psychology of transcendence. Teresa experienced a fear that few dare to admit, the fear of losing her mind in the face of unexpected visits from grace. At times, her experiences were so profound that she wondered if she wasn't heading towards madness. Fear it reveals the delicacy of the soul when touched by something greater than it can comprehend. And yet, even trembling, she remained in prayer, seeking peace of God to calm your restless nights. This fear of disorientation also appears in the lives of those who begin the inner journey. When the soul approaches the frontiers of mystery, racing thoughts, the anxiety and the feeling of instability seems to threaten the balance. But it is precisely at this point that Teresa realized that God does not destroy, but expands the heart. The soul, exposed to the unusual, learns little by little to trust in divine protection, finding shelter in hiding place of the Most High. And from this contrast between astonishment and tenderness, a new stage is born. The soul begins to distinguish between confusion and transcendence, realizing that what seemed like madness is, in fact, an invitation to profound transformation. Teresa teaches us that this fear is not a sign of loss, but of passage, and it is in this crossing that the next movement opens, that instant in which prayer, one's luminous, becomes preparing the heart for the collapse that precedes true union. When prayer feels like an abyss, Teresa's inner collapse before her breakthrough, there comes a point in the journey when prayer ceases to be a consolation and becomes a silent abyss, where nothing answers. Teresa knew this place, a void so profound that the soul fears it will never return. It is there that these things arise. Concern, sleepless nights, feelings of abandonment, and the impression that even the peace of God he hid himself. However, this collapse is not a fall, but preparation for something the soul cannot yet comprehend. In this aridity, Teresa discovered that prayer does not depend on feelings, but on fidelity. The exhausted heart learns to rest even when it feels nothing, a surrender that is, in itself, a prayer before beta, gentle and implicit feeling, born from the last thread of hope. The soul, incapable of producing devotion, simply allows itself to be sustained by God as one who takes refuge in him, under his wings, trusting that the light will return. And it is precisely at this point of total emptiness that the opening to true contemplation occurs. When the soul ceases to rely on itself, something new begins to blossom, a silent confidence, a strength that does not come from effort, but from the discreet touch of God. And while Teresa traverses this inner night, the next movement of the castle emerges, the conflict between heaven and fear. When the soul awaken struggles, its old shadows. A soul torn between heaven and fear, Teresa's darkest night in the second mansion. In the first steps of the interior castle, Teresa describes a divided soul, drawn to God, but still strongly bound to the fears and echoes of the world. Second home, the heart, has already heard the call of the light. But it still carries anxiety, old temptations, and a strange resistance to allowing oneself to be transformed. It is an inner night in which the soul oscillates between confidence and fear, like someone walking uncertainly under dense shadows. Teresa knew this tension well, the yearning for holiness mixed with the fear of surrendering completely. Here, profound doubts arise, thoughts race, and the feeling that the interior life demands more than one can give. However, it is precisely in this clash between heaven and fear that the soul learns to turn to. Refuge, God gently repeating the spirit of Psalm 46 and of Psalm 23, seeking safety in the shepherd who leads through the dark valleys. And as the soul struggles and moves forward, something softens within it, a thread of hope in the darkness, a nascent confidence that still trembles, but does not give up. Teresa teaches that this phase, although painful, is precious, for it awakens the courage necessary to continue. And it is in this journey that the next step emerges, when fear begins to transform into intimacy, and the heart discovers that even terror can become a gateway to God, Teresa's panic and peace. The transformation of fear into divine intimacy. When fear reached its peak, Teresa discovered a mystery that only silent prayer could reveal, the place where panic transforms into surrender. There were moments when she felt her heart tighten, overwhelmed by anxieties that seemed irreversible. But there, at her most vulnerable point, she perceived a discreet touch of God, as if her soul were being gathered under his wings, receiving the promised smoothness in Psalm 91. This inner movement from agitation to stillness is born when the soul abandons the need to control its path. Concerns, anxiety, racing thoughts, and the fear, they begin to give way to a simple, almost childlike trust. Teresa realizes that it is not she who sustains the prayer, it is God who sustains the soul. And this realization heals old wounds and restores to the heart the inner peace, the one that the world cannot give. Thus, what was once a source of terror becomes a gateway to intimacy with the Creator. Fear reveals itself as a hidden teacher, preparing the soul for a more stable union, for deeper rest, and for purer love. And in this loving awakening comes the next step, the discovery that even the most frightening visions can lead to holiness when seen as opportunities for purification and inner truth, a path that Teresa will follow further. From horror to holiness. Teresa's vision of hell as an inner awakening. When Teresa beheld the horror of that vision, her first impulse was to tremble. The second, to surrender completely. The soul, faced with something so terrible, realizes that there is no other safety but the refuge in God. There, where all seemed lost, a new courage was born within her, a living awareness that only divine love can redeem the darkest parts of our own being. The vision was not meant to fuel fear, but to reveal the truth of the soul, that which has not yet been purified, the attachments that suffocate, the hidden fears that breed anxiety, restless nights, and tormenting thoughts. Teresa understood that this painful revelation was also healing. The soul, confronted with its own shadow, learns to find rest under his wings, seeking the light that restores and leads to peace of God. And from this extreme experience is born a more conscious, more humble, more steadfast holiness. Terror becomes a path, darkness, inner clarity. Teresa emerges from this vision transformed and teaches us that true conversion happens when we allow God to illuminate even the most hidden corners of the inner castle. And so, the soul prepares for the final step, the moment when touched by truth. It will never pray in the same way again. The most terrifying vision in Teresa's life, and why she never prayed the same again, the vision that most shook. Teresa was not merely a terrifying scene, but a revelation of the depth of the soul and the urgency of conversion. Faced with that horror, she felt her heart crumble, as if all her fragility were exposed at once. And yet, it was in this abyss that she discovered a new way of trusting God, a delivery that arises not from consolation, but from truth. After that experience, his prayer was never the same again. That concerns the fear, anxiety, and the restless nights began to be surrendered to God with more humility, more sincerity, more hunger for holiness. What was once just a habit became a profound cry, a prayer for peace, one prayer for family protection, a continuous plea to remaining the shelter of the Most High. The soul learns to pray with its whole being, not just with words. And so, Teresa emerges transformed. Her prayer becomes fire, her faith becomes strength, her surrender becomes a path. She teaches us that spiritual life is not deepened by theories, but by encounters, including those that shake the heart. And it is from here that the next step of our journey is born. To understand this revelation in all its depth through the introduction that will open this path with strength, mystery, and spiritual urgency, Teresa's entire journey from darkness to inner awakening reminds us that no shadow is permanent when the soul chooses to remain with God. The same pains that cause pain today, fear, anxiety, racing thoughts, and sleepless nights, can become gateways to a peace that the world cannot offer. But this peace is born when you allow divine light to touch even the places you preferred to hide. Now, ask yourself, what part of your inner castle are you still afraid to enter? What wounds do you need to offer to the Creator in order to find inner peace, renewed confidence, and true spiritual freedom? And how should your daily prayer be? A morning prayer, evening prayer, prayer for strength, or prayer against fear? Can it become me from today onwards? A path to real healing that you choose to live under the refuge in God, walking with firm conviction, certain that faith conquers all anxiety and all darkness. If this series touched your heart, subscribe to continue deepening your spiritual life with Teresa, and allow God to guide every step of your soul. Under His wings,